Thank you, Chris. I don't think I really need an additional introduction. I'm a zoologist by training, specializing, as you said, in fish parasitology, and some of these representatives also occurs in the marine environment, and hence the link with the marine environment. The presentation I did a while ago focused sort of was equal rights for parasites, to make a case for parasites, and I don't want to do that again this evening. So first of all, I need to stress that with this presentation, I have no intention to offend any NGO, any nation, any race, or even any animal phylum group. I just want to share or unlock the nature with all of you. So yes, the topic for tonight is size does matter, but I want to emphasize the idea that in terms of size, maybe we must add volume, amount, and quantity the moment we start talking conservation-wise as well. And I'm going to introduce to you representatives of the phylum Mollusca. Now, probably the Mollusca is also now quite known of the Craig Foster's octopus film. But in the Mollusca, there are 8 classes, one of which is the Gastropoda, which includes the marine snails, the sea hares and sea slugs, as well as the Pulmonata, which is the representatives of the terrestrial and freshwater snails. Now, for the beginning of the presentation, I'm going to bombard you with a little bit of information on the limpets, the Crickles, with a stronger focus later on then on the Abalone. The family Patellidae, you will see that in front of the genus Patella, there's an asterisk. That is because the higher classification of the Patellas changed, and the genus Patella we don't find along the South African coastline anymore. What we do find is representatives of the genus Symbila, Scutellastra, and Halcyon. In the family Nasalidae, we have one species, Solana capensis, that occurs all the way up along our east coast up to the Indo-Pacific. And then in the case of Nasala, I'll refer to that later. And I made notes for myself because I'm going to say some stuff that's not really in my field of research tonight. Now, really, many, many moons ago, I was in the privileged position to be able to travel all around our coastline, collecting limpets. That was part of my PhD work, and we were able to describe Manduscophidia branchi. And that was named after George Imago branch because of the enormous scientific contributions they made specifically to our limpet species. The second symbiont that we found on the gills of the limpets were Lichnophora limpetae, obviously now named after the host on which they occur, which are recognized by the oral and basal discs surrounded by cilia with a chain of macronuclei in the body. In the case of Nasala de Lasarti, they inhabit a very cold place, and my one promoter, Linda Besson, had the opportunity to do research on Marion Island in 1997, and this resulted in the description of Manduscophidia marioni, which was obviously named after the island, but the island was named after Mark Joseph Marion de Freshney. And completely now off the topic, Rod Cassidy, years ago, actually worked as a technician on Marion Island as well. If we move on to the Crickle or the Olirock from the family Turbinidae, most of the human inhabitants living around the coastal areas will probably recognize the Crickle, especially when they prepare the foot of this animal. Then they add lots of garlic and then swallow it down with a lot of red wine because Crickle is also being eaten. We found a Manduscophidia species that we still need to describe. Also on the gills, we found one of the Lignophoras, which I named after Linda Besson, also in recognition of the work that she does on the Ciliophorans specifically. The other family I want to introduce you to is the family Halewittidae. And you'll see there's roughly about 100 species, of which 5 are found along our coastline, with the Venus ear or the Siphi, quite well known because fishermen also uses the Siphi as bait, and then also Abalone. And locally, we also refer to Abalone as Parlemoen. The rest of the world talk of Abalone in the general name as Abalone. Now, contrary to the 17 limpet species that we found along our coastline. All of them only has Mantis cophidia branchia on the gills. But in the case of the abalone species, abalone and Siffy, we found that on the abalone, there's a species that we described as Mantis cophidia mediae, and then on the Siffy, we found another species of the Mantis cophidia that was described as Mantis cophidia spadiciae. Now, just for the record, the protozoans are not the only symbionts we found associated with these snails. There's a number of flatworms, larval, tapeworms, as well as shell borers from the group of Polychaeta that are also found associated with these snails. Now, you probably wonder now, so what? Now, we have a theory that the ciliates that we find on the gills of these snails might increase the respiratory area of the snails because the ciliates are less than 1 millimeter in diameter. This means through the normal diffusion process, gas exchange can actually take place. Another thing that you need to keep in consideration is where we find the limpet species. And you'll see here, a lot of our limpet species are quite territorial. So they will literally return to a fixed home scar after feeding on the algae on the rocks. And the moment they return to that home scar, they form a watertight seal around themselves, keeping the gills actually moist, which is one of the requirements for diffusion to take place, the respiration to take place. Another theory that we have is because some of these ciliates, specifically in the case of the Lignophoras, they move around over the gills. So maybe by moving around, they clean the gills of extra debris that's on the gills, more or less like a creepy crawly will function. Now, for my so what number 3, I'm going to focus a little bit more on the Aliwotis. Also, just keeping in mind that the limpets, the Alicreco, all of them are edible species, but it's only Aliwotis mediae that are actually found along our coastline. It is also a species that is in high demand in the Asian countries because of cultural, traditional, and medicinal qualities. And it's becoming a really lucrative business. And currently we have roughly 14 abalone farms around our coastline. Now, to put this a little bit into perspective, in 2015, roughly 1,400 tons of aquaculture projects were exported to Hong Kong. Now, in the case of the abalone, they are sold the moment they are more or less 100 grams in size, but they are then sold for 420 Rand per kilogram. So it's quite a pricey thing. Because our abalone is so sought after and has a high value, also because of the fact that they actually travel very well when they live specimens, you can pay up to 3,650 Rand for one specimen when you have a dinner in the Far East. Another advantage of our abalone species is they are really one of the largest species that we found all over the world. And they, in the last couple of years, are really becoming a money-making spinner. So it does seem that size matter. Now, the other uses of the abalone is in the canned form because it's a little bit cheaper and it's also easier to prepare for it. And initially, abalone was not sold in our restaurants, but the last couple of years, there's a market that is slowly also becoming to develop for the local restaurants in South Africa as well. Another use of the abalone is what they refer to as the TCMs, the traditional Chinese medicine. And I must confess, I was really surprised when I saw that an animal can change into a plant, then it becomes a herb, and then it has all kinds of medicinal values, and it can treat all kinds of diseases. Another thing in the case of the abalone is the shells are used for decorative items. Now, some can say it's practical, some can say it's beautiful, or maybe some of us will just say that's straight out kitsch. Now, abalone is also served in weddings and banquets and on special occasions, and then it's seen as a status symbol and as well. And it also seems the moment you do present abalone as part of the menu at your children's wedding, they will live happily ever after, and there will be no troubles between the in-laws. Now, this brings me to my number 4. one of the other pressures on the abalone industry, namely poaching. And yes, I know this is not true just to abalone specifically. I mean, we can go on and on and on about poaching of animals, but it does have a direct influence on the numbers of abalone in our coastal areas, because it's in the ocean, we don't see what actually is happening in our ocean. So it has really a tremendous influence on it as well. Now, in the beginning of this year, there was an article that a gas bottle exploded, and by default, an illegal abalone operation was exposed. Now, you can see the street value of that was 900,000 rand. So this is not small change if we're looking at the high street value that it has. A couple of months later, another bust, and almost 2,000 specimens that was confiscated on one bust only. What is also coming through in newspapers and stuff is that the illegal abalone industry currently makes up roughly 50% of the total abalone trade. So obviously with revenue money, that's going to be a concern for the government as well. We also know that COVID had an influence on a lot of activities, but COVID also had an influence on the abalone industry, because the moment the borders started closing, nothing could actually be exported. COVID also had obviously influence on the black market with the poaching of the illegal abalone. Obviously, that was a good thing that happens specifically. Now, the question that comes up to my mind is, what can we then do to have a sustainable industry in abalone as well? And what can we do also to protect it more? And then this is where citizen science come in. Now, throughout the number of the unlocking presentations, citizen science came up. Last week, even Lucy Kemp mentioned in her talk, and Christian Brink with the next talk that's going to come also already referred to citizen science as well. Now, earlier last year, Cavalier and co-workers published actually a book on guidelines to citizen sciences. And in short, it means that it's volunteers that assist scientists to contribute to the data and then add value to the projects there specifically. Now, when I was looking for additional information on citizen sciences, I came across the fact that April was actually Citizen Science Month. When I fiddled a bit more on Google to see what kind of marine projects are being done, I also found that quite a number of projects is happening and running concerning the mollusca, but it focuses on the nudibranchs, not necessarily on the snails. If we also look at what is happening with marine citizen science projects in South Africa, we can see that we really have only a few projects that is actually running compared to what is running obviously now in America and in the UK as well. But we have the South African National Biodiversity Institute, and through them is a thing that runs as iNaturalist. And that is really a unique setup, because it includes all forms of biodiversity that we have, from invertebrates, fungi, birds, everything. And on that website, there are different categories. And I only highlighted the illegal harvesting one because I'm talking now about the abalone and the abalone poaching specifically. So let me quickly show you. So if you go to iNaturalist, obviously you make then the selection if you're going to go to plants or to animals or whatever. And because we're talking about the mollusca, we will then click on the mollusca, and then it will open this beautiful collage of representatives of the mollusca. And from there on, you can now start clicking into the next field and to get more information. But just to highlight, there's the Crickle, examples of some of the nudibranch and sea hare, and just that large snail that you see there, that is actually a terrestrial snail of the Argentina group that we found also in Africa. They're really large, and when I say large, it's about 10 centimeters in length. But because we talked about the limpet, so if you're on iNaturalist, and then you're going to click on the limpet, you'll get into the next site where you'll find information specifically now of Cimbilla oculus, giving you a distribution range of information around the coastline. And the same we can do now in the case of the Hollywoodus meadow. And in this program, so if you actually have an area where you can note a new distribution or more poaching that is being taken place, all that data, or if you really collect a large specimen, all that data can also then be added to iNaturalist. Now, I'm not losing my mind, just stick with me. So moving on to my so what 6. And as I've said, I am aware that a lot of animals are exploited, poached, ruined. But if I want to keep this into perspective with volume, amount, and quantity, in the context of size that matter, I want us to make a comparison between rhino poaching and abalone poaching. Now, since 2013, our neighboring countries, Zimbabwe, Namibia, and Kenya, there was an increase in the poaching of rhinos in those countries as well. And in 2015, it was actually the highest number of rhinos that has been poached. If we look at the South African numbers for 2007 to 2020, we see more or less the same pattern. And you will note that obviously in 2020, the numbers of rhinos that were poached was also lower. That is also because of the fact that COVID had an influence on the decrease in that as well. But the whole COVID thing triggered something in China also. And that was that there was a ban on the commercial breeding and trade of almost all terrestrial wild animals for the consumption of food. But that excluded animals that were used for traditional medicine. This means that regardless of the changes that took place, the rhinos were excluded because we don't breed rhinos for food. Do keep in mind, we do farm with abalone because they are eaten. So it's a little bit of a different story between the rhinos and in the case of the abalone. So all the rules and regulations are still in place when it comes to traditional medicine. So it means elephant bone, tiger bone, penguin scales, everything is actually still on the table to be used. Now, this brings me back to our abalone. So if we again look at amount, there was another bust of 2.7 million rand. And that specific bust also ended up with 16,000 specimens. And the weight of that was roughly 376 kilograms. Now, if we look at the weight of one abalone and the weight of a rhino, if we look, for instance, just of the weight of a horn, we can play with these numbers. And I don't want to downplay the numbers of the rhinos, because in a period from 2007 up till 2020, 8,900 rhinos were poached. But I mean, one bust means that's more than 15,000 specimens that's completely out of the ocean. So I do think amount plays definitely a role, and quantity also plays a role. So when we start talking about conservation, I really think it's time that we start calling a spade and stop beating around the bush with these things as well. Now, I was also supposed to do my presentation a while ago, which did not happen, but at the end of April, I listened to one of the webinars by Dr. Alison Koch, and her title was From Rhinos to Avalon. When I saw that, I immediately took a screen grab of this, because that more or less gave me also the confidence that maybe what I'm thinking of comparing the rhinos and the abalones is not that far fetched. And in the presentation that she gave on also a very detailed presentation on our marine protected areas, she also emphasizes the importance of citizen science in what they were also doing specifically. So, to the unlocking clan. This is my last slide. A few years ago, you could buy rhinos, and that was supposed to assist in the protection of these beasts. Is it not time that we now start selling an abalone to try to protect the abalone? Now, I'm not an economist, so I worked inflation in a little bit in that as well. And isn't it not time that the citizen science really start participating into scientific projects as well? And just for the record, if we lose the abalone and the marine snails, we lose the Mantis Cophidia and Lichnophora species. Yes, they are small, but even they occur in very, very high numbers. So in the end, I hope you will agree with me, size does matter. And there's all the literature I cited. That's my story.
Yeah, Liesl, quite fascinating. You certainly have lots of passion around all of this. But I just a thought that went through my mind straight away now is the common denominator is the demand in China. And I think it's not only these two species. Let's make the abalone iconic as well. But it's not only these two species. It's many species of animals. And so I think we have to look at that. The demand in the East is enormous. And how are we going to get around that?
Lou, if I can answer you with this, we have in the department a student that is actually completed his PhD a year or so ago. He's from China. His dad is an entomologist, but this guy came out to South Africa around about 2006, 2007 to study zoology with us in the department. And in the past, we used to take the third year zoology students on excursion, and then while we were at the Ruip Nature Reserve, because that's where it's a protected area, we were walking on the rocks, and Zhao says, but he's now sort of saying he apologized on behalf of his fellow countrymen. And then what he also told us is that we must understand that the really it's in their tradition, and that's why I say I don't want to offend any nation, but it goes back generations. And for those poor people, it means tremendously a lot to them if they have a wedding and they can give some abalone or some rhino to the in-laws, because it has that value. They have no idea or recollection of how the animal looks like or where it actually comes from. So it's not just the fact that people are misusing it, it's really embedded in even in some of our own traditions that we also have. And then just on the point of poaching, because I've been following this abalone for I really haven't been in my bonnet with this for a very long time, but there was a presentation of poachers in the PE environment, and where the guy said, we're not crooks, but it's a way of life. And people think that with the money I make by selling these illegal elements, I'm just going to buy drugs the whole time. I actually pay for my children's school fees and shoes. So I'm also not saying, yes, poach, but there's more behind this. It's a bigger thing that we need to deal with.
Cool. Helen Peters asks, I'm wondering how poaching is being controlled at the WIP specifically, since tourism has increased significantly at the reserve. It's a good one. I might add as well if we can.
Okay, I can answer Helene Peters, because Helene Peters was actually Helene Botes. She was a student of mine that also did the description of Manduscophidia spadicea and Mida. She's living in America now. Helene, the controlling in the WIP is still because of the ranges that they have there as well. I mean, the last time that we were in the WIP was in 2019. And the spots that we know in the pools where the high numbers of abalones actually still there. So there's still some control in the WIP. But if you go outside to the WIP, to the Gansbaai, then you actually have some challenges and animals in that area with really poaching. And guys walking with automatic rifles during the poaching, you can hear shocking stories of the poachers.
Or filming them unknowingly. You're filming whales, and then all of a sudden a little boat comes by and the ranger tells you, oh, those are poachers, don't film them. But yeah, if I might add, and I think here we can take our hats off to Cape Nature. Cape Nature is an absolutely incredible organization. It's very well run. And they don't allow anything that's not that you're not allowed to do, especially with us. I work for Homebrew Films, and we do a lot of filming with Cape Nature, and we have a very good understanding, but you are not allowed to break the rules. Brilliant organization, just lovely people.
Thanks, Liesl, for the talk. It was interesting, and I like the offer for a sort of workshop discussion. I think it's quite fun, but I've always thought that isn't there an option for almost synthetically manufacturing the flesh of abalone or even, I mean, I thought of this for, you know, rhino horn and whatever, and actually selling that extensively. Now, I know with the rhino horn, there were always issues with where the guys didn't believe it was the real thing, and they wanted to see the ear with the horn and all those sorts of issues. But with an abalone, it's a little lump of sort of salty flesh. I mean, is there absolutely no way we can almost take advantage of the demand and produce this stuff, and it's, you know, make millions out of it, which go back into conservation?
Marty, yes, you're 100% correct that people, if they don't believe it, but there's even stories that if you go to some of these markets and you buy whatever is being sold as rhino horn, it's because it's now in a powder form. If they do taste that it's actually not rhino horn at all. So people are also buying stuff that's not a true thing, because it's remember, it's money, question and demand as well. But as I've said, and literally as Zhao explained to us, is we need to understand the culture behind this, and there's no ways that you're going to convince people. I mean, it's like telling us in South Africa we must all stop eating meat. Seriously, I mean, we're not going to do that.
So instead of trying to convince them not to consume it, we provide it in a sustainable way, as opposed to the poaching, and actually make an industry out of it that actually all the money goes back into conservation. I don't know if there's ideas that people have thought about. I mean, they're talking about factory grown meat. It's not from animals. It's actually produced in a factory.
Yeah,
and
that's coming. But one of the differences is, remember also in the case of the rhino, it's literally just the horn that is being used for poaching. And in the case of the abalone, there is really a market for eating abalone. I mean, even people along our 2008, 2009, 2010, you could not collect abalone even on our permits because the numbers were decreasing. But I think you can now, again, on the bite licenses, you can collect a few specimens of abalone because people along the coastline eat it like they eat on a Crickle.
Hello, I'm glad you can see me. Sorry, I'm going to be the one that defends people now. But when it comes to abalone, can't you go on the fact that it is really a very important keystone species in the marine world, and try and bring that into the citizen science rather than, and I'm sorry to all the rhinoceros people, but I think that abalone's role in the ecosystem is a little bit more important than that of the rhinoceros at the moment. And you can probably bring that into citizen science to get people to be aware of the importance of this very slow, interesting organism.
Yeah, you're 100% correct, Gerard. That's something I did not deal with, is to see the ecological importance of abalone in the entire intertidal area. But you definitely have a point there. And also, if you look at the distribution of the abalone around our coastline, and what I did not mention is, for instance, in our limpet species, the majority of our limpet species are endemic. We only found them along our coastline, so that makes them even more special. Yeah, Marty, you have another question.
So it's more a response to Gerard's point, and I think that's also a real thing. Not that I'm wanting to offend anyone, but people respond to something that's there when the rhino is having its horn cut off, and you can hear it crying, you can see it bleeding. Whereas a piece of shell with a piece of rubberized tacky holding it on the rock doesn't make people's heart feel too distraught. So from an intellectual point of view, you can convince people that it's a keystone species and it's, you know, important in nature, but it's the same as people, in my mind, don't really feel too bad when we see the Amazon, or not when they see the Amazon being destroyed. It's just trees. They'll grow again. Don't worry about that. It's not bleeding. It's not crying. It's not so sad.
But it's true. I think if I may add here to it all, to Marty, to your first question and comment about maybe recreating the substance in a lab. A while ago, when we did Spark Talks with the LCA, we had a young Vietnamese gentleman called Pan Hea Long. And he, interestingly enough, Vietnam and a group of people here in South Africa had this exchange program where they brought students from Vietnam, which was at that time the largest importer of illegal rhino horn on earth, to teach them exactly this, to show them what the rhinos are and where they belong and why they belong where they are. And in the end, the students had to go back and tell the story to their parents, to cease the myth, and to create awareness in a different way, to tell the story differently, to take the culture and change it. Now, I don't know if it actually worked in the end. We should actually follow up with them, but it was a brilliant idea, using kids to, and they were what, between 12 and 15 years old, to tell the story differently, to teach their parents that or the people that actually believe in the use of the rhino horn or the use of whatever. You know what? It's actually not that. It is an animal, and maybe that also then adds to what Gerard said, that if we use the right story, the right narrative, to change the ideas, to change the perception that we have about these animals, maybe that will work. With enough time and enough voices, I think we can get somewhere, definitely.
Yeah, so just going back also to Liesel's red rhino horn that she showed at the beginning of the talk, that was actually one of the guys who was in Honorary Rangers, Andrew Patterson, who had started with that whole sort of initiative. And they used the funds raised from that to bring celebrities from Vietnam to the Kruger and other places and expose them to take the message back and try and educate the people. So yeah, it's I think education is one side, and great to try and stop, but maybe there's an opportunity to, from that demand, still make money.
Okay. Isn't it possible to farm them? And if it is, can't one look at getting these poaching and communities and fishing communities involved in that from an artisanal point of view? And then if you can farm them and they produce lots of eggs, can't you sort of reseed, or lots of larvae, can't you reseed the pools in the selected pools and actually do a mixture of farming them in the sea and on land?
In the case of the abalone farming, and specifically with Julian's PhD years ago, we actually visited one of these abalone farms along the coastline. Abalone takes about 8 years before they are reproductive ready. So that's why also if you poach them less than 10 centimeters in size, you're actually poaching the undersized specimens. That is what's happening. So the snail doesn't have the time to reproduce at all. And that's what's happening. There's a legal size that you are supposed to be removed from the rocks, and that applies to Crickle as well. If you go along the South African coastline, for instance, to Jeffreys Bay, in that area, you will not find these huge size Crickles anymore. But if you go to Tsitsikamma and to the Roop, you actually still find the large size of them. So that is the one thing in the case of the abalone, is the time it takes for the snails to be reproductive ready. So in the farming they are really successful with that. They have a couple of fungal diseases with some of the farms, but that's just also have to do with husbandry. And then they sell also the abalones already at 100 grams. So because you cannot farm with something for 8 years before you can sell it. So that is the point of farming it. So reseeding the ocean with it. We must also look at the distribution record. Now, Haliotis medae does occur along the entire coastline, but there's one or two of the other abalone species, smaller ones, but they only occur on the East Coast as well. So I hope I answer your question, Jeremy.
Thank you for having me around. I'm a doctoral candidate at Nigeria, and I would like to take our attention to what is actually obtainable in context to the conservation of pangolin in Nigeria. I heard you talking about the effectiveness of citizen science in determining the distribution of species the other time. So I would like to ask, how effective will citizen science be able to actually ascertain the distribution of a species that to an extent has been described as very difficult to find, even for ecologists in the wild. How effective will citizen science be able to, give us a precise data about the distribution of such animal? Because as it stands, it seems the poachers are having more hands because they know these very locations where these animals, these pangolins, are found readily. But then the ecologists are still finding it so difficult. We still don't know how to go about where these animals are and where we can actually take data that will inform conservation effort on them. So thank you.
I think Rod can probably will be the best. I can't see if Rod is still in, and Rod can answer this because he has quite a lot of experience with the pangolins as well. But what I just want to what I think is, with the involvement of citizen sciences, it means that more and more of the general public will become involved. And the moment you have people being involved, they start taking responsibility for these animals. And if you have more and more people being aware of it and the fact that we need to protect them, they have a function in the ecosystem, then I think we will start creating a culture of not just destroying everything. So and the same applies with the pangolins. I mean, it's not the entire animal that goes to the Far East, it's the scales. And I mean, we some of the previous presentations, unlocking, Chris, you must correct me, I think there was already about 2 or 3 presentations on the pangolin projects that Rotele is doing up in the Congo. And some of the images that they showed there with those heaps and heaps of pangolin scales, it's actually shocking to see. But if you don't know that scales belongs to a pangolin, you will also not make the association with it. And I think that is where the citizen science projects can start having an effect.
Ron, I'm aware that Llewellyn's got his hand up.
Yes.
Yeah, I just want to ask Liesel on this point. Liesel, be very practical and tell me, in terms of Abalone, what can we do through citizen science? What would you expect of the public to go and do? Share that with us. What is your vision on that, please?
Once when we did some of the field work in the web, there were actually people that came into the park, and because we know those pools quite well. So we saw abalone in a pool a little bit higher up that we know they were not supposed to be there. So obviously somebody picked up 1 or 2 abalone that they wanted to poach. So what we literally did is we just moved them back. So as a citizen science, if you know what's in the pools and where they occur, so if you go down to the coast, start knowing what you will find in the pools, because then you will be more aware to realize, okay, but this animal cannot be this high on the shore, on the shoreline. It needs to be closer to the low water mark. And I think that is the way that citizen science can then become more and more involved. If you understand a little bit where they are, and if you find something out of the distribution range.
Just to come back to the utilization, which we spoke about a little earlier on, I just want to perhaps tell everyone at this point in time that we are actually organizing an online symposium at Westerlowveld on the 4th of September. And we'll put the notice out quite soon in terms of the details with respect to that. But it's going to be on sustainable utilization. And quite frankly, to utilize not at all, or if we utilize, how to do it sustainably. But we're going to be focusing on the wildlife trade in particular, specifically with respect to iconic species. But obviously, much of it could also relate to marine species as well. So I'll just keep everyone up to date on the developments, but within the next couple of weeks or so, we'll probably be able to put a notice out with respect to that symposium. And it's going to be, as I said, on do we sustainably utilize or don't we utilize at all? I mean, that question actually came up early on. I mean, do we sell these things or don't we sell them at all? How are we going to solve the problem with respect to the demand? I know that this is an extremely hot topic, especially when it comes to iconic species, which I don't even want to mention. But yes, so I'll let you know.
I just wanted to know, I don't have as much faith in humanity as it seems all of you have. But if for citizen science, if you give people where the things are you want to protect, aren't you just giving them it in a golden platter. Here you go. There's all the abalone. There's the rhinos. Because I know in science has become a lot of time in publications, you're not allowed to say if you're working on species that are a threat to poachers. You're not allowed to actually say where the research was done anymore. So especially with 2 questions ago about the pangolin, if you ask citizen science, where did you find the pangolin, and it gets published online, I mean, anybody who's got a horrible capitalist streak in them, you know what I mean? It's they're gonna go for it. So I just wanted to know, how certain are you that citizen science can overcome the poaching industry? Because it seems like it's another factor that will just help them. Sorry about the negative question for the last one of the evening. I'm just wondering.
No, it's important questions. Who wants to add?
Yeah, Gerrit, I don't think we will solve it. We will solve it. We need to make people more aware of it. And in some of the unlocking conversations that we had, and also with Chris referred to the share screen thing we're busy with, we once in one of the meetings we had a discussion on the use of the word education. And I made the comment, maybe we must rewrite the dictionaries and get rid of the word education, because what are we educating? I know Cheryl goes, I know she had a heart attack there. But if we keep on just saying educate, aren't we not bored people because we're throwing all this information on them? I think we must really start
how we tell the story.
Make the education, start making education also sexy, to in a different way get the message through. So got it back to, yes, if we put all the information out there, we're going to expose the animals even more. But if we get the out there so that people understand the value of it, maybe slowly we'll start reaching people. Okay, Cheryl, have you now got your breath back?
No, Lizo, that went through my mind many years back as well. But then I suddenly realized there's 3 types to education. There's the cognitive, there's the affective, and there's the psychomotor. And I believe in the latter 2. If we don't get hands-on and effective with the heart. So I believe in the 3 H's, head, hands, and heart. So I know knowledge is important, but it's got to be balanced with the heart and with the hands. And if we don't do that, we're lost.
Good evening, everyone. Hello. Hi, Prof. Thank you for the talk. It was great. I would just maybe like to react on Gerrit's comment about when you make the information available online, you're giving these creatures to the poachers on a silver platter. I mean, we experience that as well in botany. In the Northern Cape, the biggest crime is poaching of succulents. And I experience this yearly when I go and do my field work. I have to be so careful. I have to put up, notices of what I'm doing, why I'm doing it, take my permits. Otherwise, every single person reports me to the authorities, and I spend most of my time with police officers, which I do sometimes. But that just goes to show how people do actually engage, because in the Northern Cape, they make a big effort to, get the community involved in basically looking out for poachers, reporting poachers, and so on. And it's really effective. They're catching the people. So the moment you involve the community, you get an extra set of hands to help with conservation. It's really important. And then the second thing I would like to mention is we at the herbarium have our database of all the plant specimens that we have in the collection. And obviously we want to share this with the scientific community. So we have a website on which you can get all the data from our specimens to use in research, but obviously we don't want to notify people about sensitive localities of rare and endangered species. So we just basically block those ones out. So I guess involving people in systems and science like iNaturalist and having the locality data and all sorts of other data collected, you can protect the endangered species by just having an extra layer of admin, which is of course unfortunately more work for people, but you can block out information that is sensitive and then have people subscribe to the database, make sure you know who they are, and then provide them with that data, which is really important for research.